Ladies and gentlemen, sports fans alike, welcome to another edition of Bill Swerski, Sports Talk Chicago, one of the couple, two, three best podcasts around. So sit back, grab yourself a cold one and a Polish sausage, park your keister in the French room, and listen to Bill Swerski, Sports Talk Chicago.
In Chicago, you know that all sports rock. The Bears, Hawks, Bulls, Cubs, and Sox. Pick your favorite, you can choose. As long as the Packers lose. For everything you need to know, it's Bill Swerski, Sports Talk Chicago. Bill Swerski, Sports Talk Chicago.
Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of Bill Swerski Sports Talk Chicago. This is your hosts Alex and Sean. On this episode, we're going to have a very special guest. Also going to be talking about pitchers and catchers reporting for the Cubs and White Sox and all kinds of other shenanigans. But first, I'd like to thank our sponsor, the Rockford Ice Hogs. If you're not familiar with the Rockford Ice Hogs, they're the AHL minor league affiliate of the Chicago Blackhawks. What does that mean for you? You get to see the stars of tomorrow today at family-friendly, affordable prices. Sure, there's no people in the seats, but that shouldn't stop you from heading on over to icehogs.com, getting yourself a hat, shirt, jersey, signing up for season tickets when you can go, and more. Tell them Swerski Sports sent you. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we have a very special guest today. We are going to be talking all about salary cap issues in the offseason for our beloved Chicago Bears. We have Brad Spielberger, who's a salary cap analyst at Pro Football Focus, a contributor at OverTheCap, and a lawyer, correct?
That's right. Yep, the most notable, I guess, of the three, but not getting the most run.
Well, thank you so much for being on.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for having me. I really appreciate it, and pretty cool. The Rockford Ice Hogs are a sponsor.
Yeah, I love the Ice Hogs. So, I mean, first, I just have a question. I'm a kind of a cap nerd, but how did you get involved with salary cap type stuff?
Yeah, so I was an econ major in undergrad, so always interested in finance, stuff like that, and took some sports economics classes there, and so always kind of held out hope that I could find a way to work in sports in some capacity. And then decided to go to law school. And so OverTheCap.com, the head of the website is a guy named Jason Fitzgerald. And so Tulane Law, where I went, puts on a competition every year. It's called the Tulane Pro Football Negotiation Competition. And basically, we invite law schools from all over the country to come do mock negotiations. All right, say, hey, you're Amari Cooper's agent. Okay, you're the Dallas Cowboys. You're going to come into the room. You're going to present some stats, some comparable players based on statistics, and then maybe we say, okay, these guys got paid this much, therefore we think Amari's worth this much, and go back and forth and hammer out a deal. And so Jason Fitzgerald kind of helps the Tulane sports law program put on that event by providing all the salary information and contract information. So yeah, I met him my first year of law school and said I would love to work with you in any capacity possible. And just kind of went from there and just my role kept growing and growing. And then, now OverTheCap is the official data provider for Pro Football Focus. So all the, salary information you see there is from OverTheCap. And so I, have now been full-time with PFF for about 6 months.
That's great. So here we focus, as far as football goes, on Chicago Bears. And the Bears are in a position where they could easily get stuck for years to come based on the salary cap and the positions of need. Can you tell us, do we know what the salary cap for 2021 is going to be yet? Have they set that, or is that get announced once the new league year starts?
So we don't know officially yet. We're probably going to find out right before the March 17th, right before the new league year starts. Just because of all the things going on. They're negotiating the TV deals, stuff like that. But it looks like it's going to fall between 180 to 188. Probably optimistic side 185 to 188. Maybe the more realistic, pragmatic side, in between 180 and 185.
Okay, and the Bears are going to have some carryover cap space, I read somewhere.
Yeah, so every year at the end of the season, teams are allowed to carry over any excess cap space they had beneath the prior year's unadjusted cap, and I'll explain what I mean by unadjusted. So basically, the Bears were about 7 million below the 198.2 million that was the league-wide cap for last year. So their cap next year for 2021 will be whatever the unadjusted number is that we just discussed, and then they can tack on an additional 7 million that they rolled over. So that'll help a little bit.
Okay, so as it stands right now, they're over the cap, right?
Yeah. So per our projection, we're working off a 180 million projection on OverTheCap.com right now, and so they are over that number. Wherever it falls, they'll be either slightly over or slightly under, but they definitely have their work cut out for them.
And which is tough because one of the positions that they are desperate need of is the highest paid position in the NFL, quarterback.
That's exactly right.
So I know Bears fans are desperate for them to trade for Deshaun Watson. Realistically, could they do it without mortgaging the future?
So the interesting thing about Deshaun Watson, kind of the cherry on top, I've been describing it, on top of the fact that he's, obviously, top 5, top 10 quarterback in the NFL, is his extension he signed with the Texans was basically after his third season, and so this upcoming year would be what his fifth-year option season was going to be, and that was going to be about $17 million. So when they redid his deal, they kept that number about the same. His cap hit for Houston next year will be about $16 million. If he's traded, because of the way money works and what things transfer or not, he would only have a $10.5 million cap hit for an acquiring team in a trade. So, what you're giving away there is a ton of picks, and yes, you're making it obviously harder to add cheap talent, which can provide surplus value over their contract, stuff like that. But his cap hit is not, a big number, at least in 2021.
Okay, so that's, it's still a tough number to wedge in there, but that's one you can probably get to with some strategic cuts and converting some money into signing bonuses, correct?
Yep, 100%.
Any questions you have, Alex?
Yeah, well, while we're on the quarterback situation, Brad, do you think that if the Bears are going to have to acquire at least a decent quarterback, they're going to have to get Nick Foles off the books because he is still making at least a noticeable chunk of change, and obviously he didn't play very well last year, and I think the last thing Bears fans want is to see Nick Foles be the starter next year. So do you think it's realistic that they could keep Nick Foles as a backup and then get somebody else? Or do you think they're going to have to part ways with Nick Foles somehow and try to get some of that money off the books?
So they can do it. It's his number for next year is about 6.66 million would be the cap hit for 2021, which it's not tiny for a backup quarterback, but it's also not crazy or prohibitive. I think they would probably like to, if they could, move him for just a late round pick and just kind of move forward and just go with the new guy and maybe a late round draft pick or something like that. But I tend to think he'll probably be there next year.
So it's finding a number one wide receiver in the NFL is a tough road to get to. And the Bears had a few years where, in recent memory, where we had dog crap as far as wide receivers. And we have Allen Robinson now, who is a free agent. And that, based on his current salary, that putting him in a franchise tag is going to be extremely expensive. What does a realistic contract for Allen Robinson look like? And how does one manage keeping Allen Robinson while still acquiring a quarterback?
Yeah, so that's the thing there is that there's almost a tiny piece of leverage there for Robinson's camp because the franchise tag, if they were to go that route, would be just a hair under 18 million, and obviously all of that would be on the 2021 cap. So it's a very big number, of course. And so I would say, in my opinion, a realistic extension for him is about 4 years, 80 million, which again is 20 million per year. But the way they obviously structure, deals in the NFL, they could backload that, pretty substantially from a cap perspective and drop his cap hit from that 18 million, all the way down to, I mean, if they wanted to be drastic, they could drop it down to like $6-7 million. So, that's kind of the way that he could say, well, look, extending me actually helps you guys, add around me in the short term. Yes, you're paying me more on the, over the long haul, but this 1 year tag really kind of hampers your ability to make moves outside of myself.
And
Brad, I got a question for you about another player I want to talk about really fast. I know we were talking about Allen Robinson, and obviously we've been wanting an extension for a while now, but I'm looking at Jimmy Graham, and he's making a decent amount of change. Looking at Cole Kmet, possibly being that number one tight end going forward, do you think the chances are likely that they're going to cut a guy like Jimmy Graham?
Yeah, I think they're very high. If you look at the kind of the snap counts between those two guys you mentioned, if you look at Jimmy Graham's play the first, let's say, 8 weeks, and then versus Kmet's, and then the final 8 weeks of the season, by the end of the year, Kmet was out snapping him by like 2-1, whereas it was kind of the opposite to start. So, Graham is, 35 years old, which it's crazy. At tight end, like, that is an absurd number. Like, Gronk retired at 29 years old. So, he had the red zone production. He is still clearly, you can tell he's, classic, former basketball player in the NFL. Like, he's great at jump balls in the red zone, but in between the 20s, he really gave you not much of anything. So, yeah, when you save $7 million cutting him, and I think that's a likely move.
and then I'm going to guess Bobby Massey is probably a very likely candidate you move on from.
I agree. Yeah, this is actually a little something that not a lot of folks know. He actually has a team option before the league year even starts. So the Bears have to either exercise or decline, basically picking up his 2021 season. So, and I would agree. I think they'll probably decline that and move on at right tackle.
So, this is going to be speculation and not actual numbers, but an Allen Robinson extension, do you think the partial reason for that not having been done is because of the COVID situation and not knowing where that cap number is going to be?
I think it's possible, but I know he was motivated. Him and his camp, which is not normal for a player. He showed up to the combine last year and was trying to get an extension negotiated. And back in February, I was there. We didn't know as a country, really. We hadn't really understood what we were dealing with. So at that time, it wasn't an issue. It wasn't a constraint. And by all accounts, they were still making offers that were just not in the ballpark of what Allen Robinson, at least in my opinion and other people in the league's opinion, is worth. So I don't know. For whatever reason, I just don't think they're motivated to give him that true wide receiver one money, which I really don't understand, frankly. But yeah, so it's possible that now it's a factor. But there are a lot of signs indicating that they just, even before this issue, they weren't totally comfortable going there.
So looking at, the Bears salary cap situation is based on some realistic moves that players they can cut that aren't going to hurt them so much in the, play, like cutting a Bobby Massey or not renewing a contract for Bobby Massey. Not going to hurt them very much. Jimmy Graham, cutting him is not going to hurt your team. How many of those moves do you think they can do, and where do you think that could leave them in cap room just by some, easy fat trimming?
Yeah, so I think those two guys, and then Buster Screen, I think is the last one that are probably likely cuts. And so those three moves can save them about $17 million. Just from those three guys. And then also, you can get into, restructuring deals, kind of, like you said, pushing money down the line with bonuses. I also think there's probably an extension in the works for Kyle Fuller, and his cap hit right now is $20 million. So again, with an extension, that number can come down. And then potentially an extension for Akeem Hicks as well. I don't see a cut there, but maybe they could trade him and, just try to get a pick back for him. And that could clear about $10 million off the books that way, or with an extension they could clear 6-7 off the books. With Fuller, same thing, they could clear probably more, $8 or $9 million off the books with an extension there as well.
How many other teams in the league have like their top 5 cap hits defensive players?
Uh, a couple, but for different reasons. Like for example, the Ravens were on that, were kind of on that list, but it's because a lot of their best offensive players. Look at their quarterback, Lamar Jackson. They just signed Ronnie Stanley, their left tackle, to a massive deal, but he wasn't on one. Obviously, their right tackle, Orlando Brown, who's now looking for a trade, but again, cheap tackle. And then Mark Andrews, a stud tight end, and Marquise Brown, their number 1 wide receiver. So that was why they were on that list. Whereas the Bears. The last 2 years in a row now, they've been top 5 in cap space allocated to the defense. They're projected to be first overall again in 2021. And it's just not really indicative of kind of the way the league has gone. It seems to show a little bit of ignorance about how you kind of win in the modern NFL.
That's so Bears. Honestly, that is so Bears.
So my biggest fear was bringing back Ryan Pace and Matt Nagy was based on the salary cap situation, that a desperate GM that feels the heat of his position could cause havoc for the next GM as far as, draft picks available that don't get traded or do get traded away, and this cap situation. How bad do you think Ryan Pace could kick this can down the road and cause cap situations for a future GM if this offseason doesn't go as he plans?
Yeah, no, it's a very rational fear. It's something we've seen, like I always point to last offseason with Thomas Dimitroff in Atlanta with the Falcons, same thing. He kind of, we found out later, he kind of had was told by the owner, basically, you need to win this year, otherwise you're out. And so they made a bunch of moves. They signed Dante Fowler, the edge rusher, who's just has not been good for them at all. They traded a second-round pick for Hayden Hurst, the tight end formerly of the Ravens, who's a fine player, but just not worth that. It's a real fear, and it's scary. He has already kind of put a lot of money into older players and has kicked the can down the road and pushed, the money into the future already. And it's very rational to think that he's going to do that again. Because why wouldn't he? Frankly, all of us want to keep our jobs as well. So that's the thing, is you don't really blame him for that. The issue is kind of retaining him and not expecting that to happen. You should expect that to happen.
So to what degree do you think he could push financial obligations into the future? And realistically, how many years of damage could that do if, in a realistic situation, if he brings in a trade of a big money quarterback, like maybe if Atlanta moves from Matty Ice and brings in a JJ Watt, how bad could he kick the can down the road?
So he could get pretty extreme with it, and I would say it would take until 2023. So there would be, this year, let's say he does it doesn't go well, that he gets moved on from. They basically would be dealing with the ramifications for, all of 2022. They'd have a big old dead money charge, which is just cap space allocated to players not on the roster. So they'd have a lot of that from kind of older guys they've already kicked the can down the road on. They'd probably have a lot of older guys making a lot of money and would just not a lot of production there. So that whole year 2022 would just be trying to get back above water. And then 2023 would still be they wouldn't be operating at full capacity. They just have a lot of dead money still. They would still have to turn over the whole roster. We obviously know he loves to trade up in the draft every year using future draft picks. So he very well could do that again. This year, and maybe, last year he gave up their future fourth, this year's fourth. Maybe this year he gives up a future second or something like that. Which, is an important and valuable asset to help you, manage your cap space. So, I would say 2 years out, could be, significantly affected.
Brad, is there a guy on the Bears that you look at the cap space and you look at what they're making and you say, they're actually getting them at a pretty good deal? Because we oftentimes look at the players who are making a lot of money that aren't producing, like Robert Quinn. He's making a lot of money, and he did not produce last year. It was probably one of his worst years in the league. We look at Eddie Jackson. He got a big extension, and the numbers have not really been to where he was his first few years. But is there somebody on this roster you look at and saying, they're very undervalued right now for what they're doing?
It's a tough question. I mean, obviously, if we're going to include rookie contract guys, then yeah, you could probably rattle some names off there, but that's kind of a given. From a veteran perspective, it's not really, honestly. I mean, I guess you could say Akeem Hicks. He's in the last year of his deal. He only has a $10.4 million salary. And I think even though he's 31, he's still probably worth closer to about $15 million per year than the 12 that he signed on for. But again, because he's probably a declining player, we've seen some injuries and stuff like that these last couple of years. It's probably now closer to market value. So, I mean, frankly, I thought Whitehair was a good deal. I thought it came in lower than I expected it to.
Mm-hmm.
I hope they put him at a position and just leave him there. I like him at left guard personally. I thought it was crazy. I don't grade here at PFF, but he was graded like pretty middle of the road at center. And then those last, 6 weeks or whatever it was, he was like a top 5 left guard, per our grading. So, which, is not everything, but is obviously an important data point. And I've always felt that way from just the eye test, that I think he just does better there. So that's probably one good example there.
Okay. Now, Tariq Cohen got an extension last year. Do you think that extension was worth it for the Bears? Because there was kind of some back and forth in my mind going with that. Because on one hand, I think he could be very useful. On the other hand, we haven't really seen much production. Obviously, he was hurt last year, but the year before, there was a lot of north to south running that just didn't get anywhere. Do you think that was a worthy investment for the Bears to make? Or do you think that they could have kind of skipped that and maybe found a replacement?
I do think with gadget guys like that, because the market is pretty low to begin with, the deal was for $5.75 million per year, which is like not even a starting guard, right? So it's like, I get that he's a running back, but he's also, he led the Bears in receiver. I want to say he was second in receiving in the great 2018 year, both in yards and receptions. He can break off big plays, and those chunk plays are massive for an offense that can't move the ball consistently. So I don't really have an issue with it, just because the market is so low. If you look at the league, guys like James White got, that's kind of the similar deal there. He came in, below Eckler. Like, he still didn't, manage to push the market even further. And I guess he missed most of the year last year as well. So, yeah, I didn't have a problem with it. Young player, never know when he can break off a big one. So, yeah, I thought it was okay. But I understand the question, and I understand, of course, thinking like, could this money maybe have been saved and used elsewhere? I totally understand that, but I was okay with it.
There's a couple of free agent players that were on the Bears last year that kind of want to get your guesstimate of what a market value would be for them, and just to kind of give the listeners an idea of, is it realistic for the Bears to bring them back? And you already talked about Allen Robinson, but Cordero Patterson. What kind of realistic contract do you think he gets in the offseason?
Yeah, he's interesting. So, he signed for 2 years, $10 million with Chicago, which I kind of thought was a bit rich. He's obviously a phenomenal return man, but doesn't offer you a ton in the receiving game. And of course, they figured that out pretty quickly. Stopped playing him as a receiver and turned him into a running back. So, I think he'll come in below that a bit. Instead of 2 years, $10 million, maybe 2 years, $7 or $8 million. Which is affordable in theory, but because of, as we've discussed, they have a lot of other obligations and a lot of other things they need to take care of. That would be an example where I would say, look, you need to save this money. He's a luxury. He's not a foundational player. Yes, breaking off the occasional special teams touchdown is huge, but at this point, that would be like we just discussed with Cohen. That would be an example where I would say, look, this is not, an investment that's smart to make because you have so many other things to work on.
Another one would be Roy Robertson Harris.
Yeah, so I'm a big Roy Robertson Harris guy. I had been for a couple years here, and I thought coming into the season, there was no shot he was going to be able to return. I thought he was going to price himself out for sure. And now with the injury, it's interesting. I think it's possible he comes back, but I still think he's going to get some team might still give him 2 years, $10 million, 2 years, $12 million. Look, Nick Williams last year. Was a journeyman, a bunch of practice squads in his career, finally had one breakout year, and signed, 2 years, $10 million with the Lions. So I don't see why Roy Robertson Harris wouldn't have a similar market. Younger player, still, converted from, linebacker to, more of an interior defensive lineman, and got better year after year. Yeah, obviously, missed time last year, but still only 28 years old. I think he's probably priced out as well, but maybe just because of the fact he missed most of the season and all the cap issues we're dealing with, maybe they could find a way to get him back. But I'd be kind of surprised.
And then there's one more guy that I was shocked that they brought him in because he was a guy that was drafted extraordinarily high and just never had the success in the NFL, but turned out to be a fairly valuable player for the Bears in rotation. It was Barkevious Mingo. Do you think he's another 1-year deal type of guy?
He was interesting. I agree with you. He kind of exceeded expectations. Thought he was a good rotational edge piece. You're not looking for him to start, but contributes on special teams. Played a lot of snaps there, and then plays about a third of the defensive snaps and gives you a good pass rush on occasion. I think they could, him and his representation might look for a multi-year deal now. Obviously, he signed for the veteran minimum last year and played pretty well. But I could also see, again, just because of what we're facing, where he could end up having to sign for, a pretty small 1 year, $3 million, 1 year, $2 million, something like that. And I think the Bears could definitely, I think that'd be probably a smart, small signing because they're losing a lot of guys from that special teams unit. And again, they don't have a lot of depth behind, Quinn and Max. So I think that could be a good one there.
And then I just sort of assume that Pat O'Donnell is gone. They probably go with a rookie or a second-year type punter because Pat O'Donnell, I think, has been with the Bears for a long time, but hasn't been special enough to pay, the money that he's going to command.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like you got to just take, minimum salary there from an undrafted free agent or, I don't know, 7th round pick flyer. Yeah, I agree with you there.
Yeah, I went through my mock drafts last week, my early mock drafts, and had the Bears taking a punter in the 7th. I was like, I can't imagine them trying to wiggle through this cap room and fit Pat O'Donnell in there for whatever reason. So in Major League Baseball, we're seeing the top guys are getting paid, but then the next couple of tiers of guys are signing short-term deals for less money. We're seeing the actual impact of COVID financially in the free agent market. Do you think that's going to be an anomaly that only baseball sees, or do you think the NFL will see that as well?
That's the exact phenomenon I expect for the NFL. Just this offseason, I know baseball's been dealing with it for a couple years now. I think just this offseason, and I think, revenues will return and they'll be all right. But yes, that is exactly kind of what, I speak to folks around the league, like that's what our expectation is those top guys still command their money. They don't care what the salary cap is. They say, you figure it out, cook the books, whatever you have to do. I don't care. But that second tier, that middle tier is going to have to take some kind of 1-year deals, try to approve it, so to speak, for less value than they're worth on the market. And hopefully have a good 2021 and then look for that multi-year extension they deserve the following season.
This is not necessarily a Bears related question, but we see quarterbacks that are getting paid a lot of money and they're worth it. They're good quarterbacks, but once the team has to face the financial realities of paying them, they have to find ways to pay the rest of the team with whatever chunk of money's left. And makes it tough to put together a really good, solid team as a whole. And sometimes that leaves a team a little flat, and you're seeing sometimes a lashing out. Like, seems like Russell Wilson is a little unhappy with the Seahawks while he's making a giant portion of the cap for that team. Do you think that sometime in the near future there's going to be that come to God moment where the league is just like, we can't keep bringing up the quarterback salaries like this, or potentially in a collective bargaining agreement, having there be a quarterback cap and then the rest of the team cap to kind of manage those things?
Interesting ideas, but frankly, no. Just because quarterbacks are realizing, if they haven't already, that they are the most important, players on teams, arguably the most important person in the organization, and so, well, it does potentially make things more difficult. At the end of the day, that's just kind of the reality of the situation. And so, you mentioned like Russell Wilson, for example. Yeah, they obviously have some holes in that roster, but if you look at like the NFC playoffs the last 2 years. I have 2019 pulled up here. It's Seattle, so his is huge. Philadelphia, so Wentz had a big deal. Minnesota with Kirk Cousins. The Saints, New Orleans. San Fran, Garoppolo had a big deal, and Green Bay with Rodgers. So it's still, at the end of the day, as tough as it may be, if you don't have one of those guys, you're probably not in the playoff picture. So, yeah, it's an interesting idea to say maybe they kind of cap like a percentage of the cap that you can't exceed with any player, and obviously that will be targeted at quarterbacks. It's an interesting idea, and I definitely, I'm sure teams would love it. But frankly, like I think from the player perspective, like Patrick Mahomes probably thinks he should be making $80 million a year, and he's probably right. So, there's kind of two sides of the coin there. But, I think what the real phenomenon is going to be, and I think we're seeing it play out in Dallas, is that second tier. So kind of like I said, the Kirk Cousins, Minnesota, kind of that next group. If you're not a top 8 quarterback, let's say, and if you're not a guy that a team thinks this guy we can't just win with this guy. This guy will us to victory, and we can kind of win in spite of problems around him. Those guys may no longer get that top of the market deal. Like when Garoppolo hit the market, when Carr hit the market, when Cousins hit the market, they became the highest paid quarterback. And I think what we'll see now is instead of that, they'll settle in a little bit below the current top guy, and only the guys that break through will be the Mahomeses, the Watsons, etc. That'll top it. And so that'll kind of cap it a little bit. But yeah, no, those top guys are still going to get top dollar.
Yeah, in Chicago, we were all in that worry mode because we saw the Rams overpay for Jared Goff, and we saw the Eagles throw that huge contract at Carson Wentz. And the ultimate fear was we're going to throw a big money contract at Mitch Trubisky, and we still, at that point didn't know who he was as quarterback.
Yeah. Well, he put that fear to bed for us, but yeah, no, it's a very real fear, and I think will be interesting as well as this offseason. There's 3 guys due for those early extensions that have all had flashes of elite play and have had stretches of kind of troubling, concerning play. And that's, Baker Mayfield in Cleveland, Lamar Jackson in Baltimore, and Josh Allen in Buffalo. Like, obviously, Lamar won the MVP. He can win a game by himself sometimes, but he can also struggle mightily in others. Josh Allen was great this year, but, is he a one-year wonder? Was it a one-year phenomenon? Who knows? And Baker is kind of like a hot and cold guy. He's very streaky. And so maybe, Cleveland's kind of afraid to go, like Goff and Wentz, go in for that deal and take the risk and then find out that he kind of had already reached his ceiling and maybe teams kind of figured him out more and he was actually trending in the wrong direction. So I think that'll be really interesting to see is kind of if guys will still always get that early extension or if teams will say, no, we're going to let you finish your rookie contract. We're going to let you play out your 5th-year option year. And then we'll see what happens from there. Because, look, like Wentz and Goff's 5th-year option year was this season. So if the Eagles and Rams just decided to let them play those out as opposed to giving them new extensions, I want to say off the top of my head, the Rams would have given Goff $30 million less just from a cash perspective. And Wentz was right below that, like $29 million. So you save a huge chunk of cash and then obviously a ton of cap space they're giving up now, just to get them off their rosters.
Looking at all the free agent quarterbacks right now, obviously Dak Prescott is going to get the most money, but outside of him, are all available free agent quarterbacks realistically affordable for the Bears? Because looking after Dak Prescott, I'm seeing guys like Jacoby Brissett, Mitch Trubisky, obviously, Ryan Fitzpatrick, Tyrod Taylor. I would assume that those are all very affordable for the Bears going forward. I don't see many of these guys really breaking bank here.
Yeah, I'm with you 100%. I think that's kind of your, game manager, bridge quarterbacks. I'd throw Dalton in there as well. And then I think, they're all affordable, but I think the guy that's kind of, if you want to take a upshot dart throw, is probably Jameis Winston, who might be a little bit more expensive than those guys, but still probably cheap. I'm guessing still a 1-year deal because in his mind, he's probably thinking, don't sign multi-year because you want to hit free agency again if you play well and then sign that big second deal. But yeah, I think all of those guys are attainable this offseason.
My theory is, and this could just be crazy, is that when Breeze got hurt, that they didn't play Winston, because when they played Bridgewater, they priced him out of the returning as potential replacement to Breeze if he retired. I saw it as, well, they think they can do well enough with Taysom Hill that in that short term that they want to keep secret of Winston and what he can do in that offense.
Yeah, I don't think it's the craziest conspiracy theory at all. I'll be honest with you. I really don't. I do think they also kind of had to justify, which they didn't, giving Taysom Hill with this nonsensical extension they gave him. So they kind of had there was an onus apparently to play him and show we paid him for a reason. It wasn't, we believe in him. We think he can be a quarterback, and we're going to show you that that's the case. I don't think it is the case, but I also do think for sure a component of it definitely could have been look, if we put in Jameson with this, elite offensive line, just good team around him, and he has a stretch of, 6 games, a great player, whatever takes him 4 games, yeah, he'll be Teddy, he'll be the next Teddy Bridgewater. Someone else will sign him for way more than we can afford. I don't think you're crazy there.
Off topic of the Bears, when you look at the teams that potentially, well, depending on where that final cap number lies and where the overage gets applied, the Eagles and the Saints are in some trouble. How do those teams get out of this without just gutting their roster or absolutely kicking the can down the road? Is the league just going to not care? You have to be under this cap despite of COVID.
No, go ahead. Yeah, no, frankly, they don't have a choice, really. They're going to, the Eagles already started, on Friday, cutting, not really gutting their roster. Deshaun Jackson obviously didn't play much, but Malik Jackson and Alshon Jeffrey are also going to get released as soon as the new league year starts as well. They renegotiated their deals, and actually the only reason they haven't been cut is just because the team is going to use a cap maneuver to kind of push the can down the road and put some of the dead money in 2022 from their deals. So, yeah, both of those teams don't really have a choice. It's going to be a lot of restructures, which, of course, just pushes the money down the line, some tough cuts, and then also, even extending guys that maybe they didn't really want to. For example, in New Orleans with Marshawn Lattimore, he is a phenomenal corner, but a bit of a streaky player, been up and down. They're probably going to, extend him just by necessity because his 5th-year option is what he's about to play on. It's about $10.5 million, and frankly, they just can't afford to have that big of a cap hit. With the Eagles, Derek Barnett, their edge rusher, kind of the same thing. About to play in the 5th-year option for about $10.5 million. He's an okay player, but they may have to extend him just to lower that cap hit, even if they're not exactly excited about it and would prefer to see another season in a normal situation, but kind of don't have that luxury. So a lot of tough decisions, a lot of kicking the can down the road, and even kind of just investing in things that you may not want to, but kind of just have to out of necessity. And then lastly, with the Saints, the Eagles don't have any free agents really at all. But the Saints, Marcus Williams, the safety, really good player. He's probably gone. And Trey Hendrickson, edge rusher this year, finished 2nd in sacks, tied with Aaron Donald for 13.5 sacks, also probably gone.
And the last couple of things I have are, is do you think there's any Bears players that would be eligible for the Bears to, realistically, where the Bears could go and say, hey, we need you to take a pay cut? This hasn't been a historical Bears move, but do you think there's any players that would be a logical thing to do rather than asking them to take a pay cut?
That's a fair question. I think one that probably sticks out is Charles Leno. I think Charles Leno. I think more highly of him than maybe some other folks do. Look, I think he's a league average left tackle, but he's on a league average deal. But because it's the last year of his deal as well, his base salary is $8.9 million. None of that is guaranteed. And I think we saw with Minnesota last year with Riley Reif, their left tackle. also, a league average player, fine player. But they kind of came to him and said, look, we can't afford to pay you this much. We need the cap space. And they kind of called his bluff. He basically said, okay, I'm going to try to explore a trade. They gave the agent permission to call around and try to get a trade. And no team was willing to take on that cap hit for him. So given that there's a great draft class of tackles this year, given that there's a couple decent, options in free agency, I think the same thing would happen where they'd say, hey, Leno, we need you to chop, I don't know, $3 million off your salary just so we can fit, some lower end roster guys on the roster. He might say, I'm not willing to do that. I'd rather get shopped, whatever. And they'd say, okay, go ahead. Get your agent to call some teams and see what happens. And I don't think there'd be a market there. So that could be one. Maybe a Foles, but probably not. He agreed to come over and rework his deal already, so I don't think he'd be willing to do it again. But yeah, I think Leno's one that sticks out.
And then the last question I have is, I would be very shocked if it happens with Chicago, but what do you think a realistic contract for Mitchell Trubisky is for next year?
The thing with quarterbacks really is it just kind of takes one suitor. So if you asked me about Marcus Mariota last offseason, I would not have said 2 years, $15 million, which is what he got from the Raiders. Actually more than that. I think it was $17 million. But all it takes is one guy, one coach who thinks, they can take this reclamation project and turn him around. And look, Trubisky, by all accounts, is great off the field, works hard, all those things, just kind of hasn't been able to piece it together. So I think kind of similar thing. It would be 2 years, about $15 million, but in the same case as Mariota, kind of all the guarantees were in the first year. So if the team kind of doesn't see what they like and kind of says, okay, this, we took our shot, but it didn't work out, they can move on cleanly after 1 year. But I do think some team could convince themselves, we can take something of a flyer on this guy and see what we can get out of him.
Did you have any more questions, Alex?
Yeah, there was one I wanted to ask. It's a half Bears, half NFL question. It's looking at the NFC North, looking at the Packers, the Lions, the Vikings. What kind of cap situation are they in? Because it's my understanding that the Packers are kind of in a tight situation, and Aaron Rodgers kind of alluded to that in his postseason press conference when they lost in the NFC Championship. But what are the other teams like? What are the Vikings like? And I know that the Lions are probably not going to be contending next year, but I think it is still interesting to look at just from a Bears fan perspective what the rest of the division is going to look like.
No, 100%. It is interesting. It's actually pretty funny. Right now, they're based on our projected numbers, they're all in a row, and the Bears are actually at the top of that list. So it's Bears are 23rd, Lions 24th, Vikings 25th, and Packers 26th in terms of projected cap space. They all have tough situations for sure. But obviously, the Vikings and Packers have expensive quarterbacks already on the roster. So that kind of explains that there. They're going to have to do a lot of moves as well. Going to have to do a lot of maneuvering. I think Devontae Adams is going to get a huge extension, but that'll lower his cap hit. I think maybe Zadarius Smith gets an extension, lower his cap hit. I think they're going to cut Preston Smith as well, potentially. Rodgers will probably get an extension as well, or at least rework his deal in some capacity. Vikings, same thing. They have some tough decisions. May have to just move on from some guys. Riley Reef, like I mentioned, he might be gone. And they'll kick, Ezra Cleveland out to left tackle, their second-round pick from last year. So, just playing guys that maybe in an ideal situation, they probably wouldn't. The Lions being in a bad spot is honestly just kind of absurd. To be that bad and have this bad of a cap situation just shows just how poorly they were run the last couple of years. But I agree with you. I know tank is a heavy word and it is whatever, but I don't think they have plans to be competitive in 2021.
Yeah, because I have a friend who's a Lions fan, and he says that his outlook on the Lions is kind of a 2-year window for a rebuild of some sort. So that's kind of where I'm basing my opinion there. And just while we're on the Lions, out of curiosity, what does Jared Goff do to their whole cap situation? How much did it add, and how much does it affect it compared to having Stafford? Because I'm curious, because Goff is going in as what looks like a bridge, but an expensive one.
Yes, he's definitely an expensive bridge. And, that trade was a salary dump. I know there was some reporting initially that, the Lions really wanted him and they were really excited about it. But no, if you look at the trade package, in my opinion, basically Stafford was traded for a first and a third, and then the Lions agreed to take on Jared Goff plus a first-round pick just to take on his contract. So Stafford leaves $19 million in that dead money we discussed behind, and then Goff has a $25 million salary and a full cap hit of $28 million. So and most of that is guaranteed. Almost all of it is guaranteed. So definitely a big chunk on their salary cap. So I agree. It's kind of a 2-year window. I think they're just kind of, 2021 will just be about establishing a new culture and just kind of biding their time. Having a startable quarterback, of course. I know, Goff gets trashed a lot. He's not great, but he is, a startable NFL quarterback. And then maybe they just hope that he turns a corner or, gets really pissed off and motivated by the trade and takes that next step. But I do think that they're kind of targeting 2022, if not 2023, where they're going to finally, really kind of emerge with this new look roster, with this new coaching staff and new front office kind of really, putting their guys out there.
Well, Brad, thank you so much for coming on. It's for as Bears fans, the cap, usually is a meh kind of thing, but this year it's a little bit of a scary situation. So I really appreciate you taking the time to come on here and talking to us a little bit about it. Everybody, make sure you follow Brad on Twitter at PFF_Brad. Is there anything you want to plug, Brad?
No, thank you guys so much for having me on. I appreciate it. It was a lot of fun. Follow me on Twitter at PFF_Brad, and I'm talking Bears and salary cap and contracts, free agencies just on the horizon. Also do some work with the draft. So, yeah.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Brad.
Yep. Thank you.
Alex. That was awesome to have Brad on. I feel like I have a grasp on the salary cap and the workings, but it's always nice to have somebody that's a legit expert in that field. Really talk you through, how some of the things work and some realistic projections on some of the players that, are either free agents for the Bears or, potential signings.
We got to have him back, I think, post-draft, because he was awesome. He was very good at explaining things. He knows his stuff. That was really, really good.
Yeah, I love being able to, I can, finagle the draft. The salary cap in some situations, but, projecting out how contracts are structured, how you backload things and do extensions to lower the salary cap number, how some of those things work. So it was really awesome. And
there's a lot that goes into that. I mean, it's more than just looking at Spot Trek or something and looking at all the numbers and the dead cap or whatever. I mean, there's a lot of expertise that goes into that. And to be able to talk about it so, he didn't have to keep referencing something, he was just, boom, right off the top of his head, he had an answer for us. I mean, that is the sign of someone who really knows his shit. Like, that's awesome.
Yeah, so it was great. Yeah, and you're right. We should have him back once the draft happens, and, we probably by that point have an assumption of what the Bears quarterback situation is going to look like and whether or not, the Bears, I'm assuming the Bears are going to franchise tag Allen Robinson. I think it's stupid not to.
But this is the Bears we're talking about.
But the thing is if you franchise tag him, you don't really have to keep him. You could, you either do an extension and lower that cap number, or you can trade him. I'm sure you don't get what you hope for in a trade.
But you better get something than absolutely nothing.
Yeah, but you hope that you get much better than you would in a compensation pick.
Right.
So should we move on to I don't even know where we want to go. We had pitchers and catchers report for Cubs and Sox. We had a couple of Blackhawks games. We've had some ups and downs with the Bulls here. Where do you want to go next?
Well, I just want to think about warmer weather, so why not baseball?
Yeah. So let's start with White Sox. We don't give enough love, I don't think. White Sox, we have I don't know if you saw, Bleacher Report released their power rankings for Major League Baseball right at the start of pitchers and catchers reporting. So I mean, at that point, it's an exercise in what's on paper and projections, because nobody has taken an at-bat yet. But the White Sox were number 5 in their power ranking, which is a lot better than what the Pacoda projections value the White Sox at.
Yeah, and I think it makes sense to put them that high. I mean, with the potential they have, you're not going to put them top 3 likely yet, just because they have a lot of guys who are still very young. But, I think projecting them that high is very reasonable, considering what they have on paper between the pitching and the hitting. I mean, we got to remember, I know we talked a lot about the moves they didn't make, but you still look at what this team potentially has, and they have just a buttload of talent, both on the mound and at the plate. So, yeah, I didn't look at those rankings per se, but I think 5 could be a very reasonable number for the Sox this year. I also think, too, that you're going to naturally see a lot of varying opinions on a team like the White Sox. One that's had, 1 year of big step forward in a very weird COVID year, but I think there's still some people thinking, we kind of got to see this develop a little more. So, I think if the White Sox continue to trend upward, then in the coming years, you're going to see them ahead of the power rankings. But yeah, I mean, you look at Pacoda, you look at Bleacher Report, you look at a bunch of other ones. I know it's all over the place, but, look at it this way. There's nobody projecting them to be like just complete bottom feeders. I mean, they shouldn't be. They really shouldn't be. But, this is the time of year, in my opinion, where you look at power rankings for a little bit and you say, all right, just let's get in it. Let's play the games. And before we know it, we're going to have spring training games, and you're going to have a look at what this roster could potentially look like. But, yeah, no, I think the sky's the limit for this team right now.
I think so, too. I mean, if they have an Achilles heel, it's, I think the back end of that rotation could be better. I think they're pretty solid in the front of the rotation, but, who knows what we're going to see from Cease. But that 5 spot, Kopech is coming back after not having played in 2 years. Rodon has been injury prone, and when he has played, hasn't been very good. So that 5 spot is going to be, I think you could have shored that up a little better. And then the depth on this team, the starters for most of those spots, you feel pretty confident about. I mean, you're still gonna have a murderer's row. It's what's that bench depth going to look like, I agree. And we've seen where that bench depth, it becomes real important come the playoffs, and that's where I think the White Sox will struggle a little bit. We've talked about it before, where it's looking more and more like Andrew Vaughn is going to make this team and probably be have significant at bats either at first base or rotating between first base and DH, and not knocking the guy as a long-term piece, but trusting a guy who has like 57 professional at-bats to be the guy.
It's a risk.
It's a risk.
It's definitely a risk.
And,
yeah, no, I definitely agree.
And I think that's, it is not a knock on the White Sox at all. I think that bullpen is great. The top 3 starters, you got to be pretty happy about. Most teams, I think, would jump at those top 3 starters. That middle of the order, is just murderers. I think, there's a lot of reasons to be excited about the White Sox, and I'm just so bummed that they wouldn't have opened the pocketbooks to really done their best to shore up any warts that they could have.
Yeah, I mean, if you would have signed like an established DH, that lineup is bulletproof, basically. If everyone's healthy and everyone's doing their thing. But either way, I'm still I still think they're my favorite in the American League right now. If that pitching stays healthy and pitches to its potential, I don't see anyone beating them. Now they have to pitch like their potential, but if they do, I just don't see anyone else beating them, frankly.
It's funny. I was just looking through, there's not a lot going on right now because pitchers and catchers just reported. So you've got press conferences and whatnot.
Yeah.
But I was like, I totally forgot that the White Sox have Garrett Crochet and how he looked, when he came up with the White Sox last year. Just having a guy that can throw that hard is a weapon. And, we talk about it, the Cubs, Cubs haven't had a guy like that since Aroldis Chapman.
That's been like their only real hard thrower in a while, honestly.
Yeah, and just
outside Darvish.
Yeah, but I mean in the bullpen. Just having that guy that can throw gas, I was like, that is a weapon in the bullpen, especially when he's like, you've got your closer, you've got your setup guy. That guy comes in as like an ace in the hole to get you out of jams and in key situations, and that's a weapon. We saw if you could get him to work a couple of innings, just look what's his name when the Indians went to the World Series against the Cubs? Andrew Miller. How important that was for that team to go far.
Yeah, absolutely.
I guess the one more thing I want to talk about the White Sox is, we mentioned Michael Kopech. He hasn't pitched in a long time. What are your expectations for him? Because I saw him throwing some gas in a clip. It got me wondering. He's like, what are realistic expectations for that guy?
I think it's kind of hard to know. I'm not doubting the stuff by any means. I mean, I think the stuff is what we don't worry about. What I do worry about is obviously health. And the other thing I do worry about him, admittedly, is command.
Yeah.
So
I think we're going to see I think we're going to see an uptick in walks.
Yeah, and you can get away with a bit more loosey-goosey command when you throw really hard. I mean, we saw it with Aroldis Chapman here, but I don't know what that's going to look like. So it's really hard for me to point to what I think he's going to be, but I mean, if he can throw that stuff and generate plenty of swings and misses, even with some walks, he might be able to wiggle out of that stuff, because when you throw that hard, you can use that. But, it's going to be hard for me to really say what my expectations are. I don't expect him being a starter. I mean, not out of the gate, obviously, but I don't even know if I expect him to be a starter at any point this year unless they absolutely need him to be. We'll see on that end, but I expect decent amount of walks and a lot of strikeouts.
Yeah, I'm not going to go super pinpoint what I project, but I'm going to say ERA around 4.4. I'm going to say a whip of around 1.4, 1.45. And I'm going to say probably 2-to-1 strikeout to K ratio. Maybe a little higher, 2.3. You think those are fair?
Yeah, I think he could potentially be better, but I also don't think you want to predict like super amazing numbers yet. He can put up super amazing numbers, but he's got to kind of prove it first. So I think it's fair to give him those kind of numbers, especially I think you might see some growing pains with him right out of the gate. Obviously, he's going to have spring training, but, it's hard to get back when you haven't pitched in 2 years.
Yeah, a lot of those numbers I have are going to be due to walking guys. Or even hitting guys. You're going to see an uptick.
I don't envy the guys who get hit by him.
Uptick in the whip because of walks and uptick in the ERA because, if you give up a hit with runners on, you're giving up more runs. I think I think you're going to see a tough go of it early, and hopefully the guy settles in. Physically, he should be more than well recovered from the Tommy John.
Yeah.
That's the one good thing, is it because you see guys when they come back from it, in the long term, usually pitch as good, if not better. But when they first come back, there's usually a time period of working through it, and I don't know if that's a physical thing or a mental thing when that happens. So I guess we'll see, because physically he should be, well beyond that recovery phase. So we'll see if it's a mental aspect or, just being out of sorts with having pitched against a real competition in a long time.
Yeah, and luckily he's got a lot of guys around him where the pressure's not really on him, because you still got a pretty good bullpen on paper, and obviously your top 3 starters, as you mentioned, are good. So it's not like he makes or breaks everything.
Yeah, it's I look at him like a luxury. Whereas some of those other bench positions, I think, for the White Sox, I think they're not a, oh my God, it's a absolute disgrace that you don't have a better depth, but it's not a luxury either. It's somewhere in that spectrum. I think Michael Kopech is an absolute luxury this year. And, any good things he has, any good progress he has is just cherry on top. I think in a long playoff run, he probably, becomes a weapon. But, I don't think you're relying on him. I think unless you have some devastating pitching injuries.
Right. No, I completely agree.
Switching over to the Cubs, that same power rankings. I don't know if you saw the Bleacher Report power rankings. But can you guess where the Cubs were ranked on there?
Somewhere in the middle.
14th.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. Upper half, but closer to the middle. It makes sense to me. Now, who was in front of them and who was right behind them?
I mean, in the division, the Cardinals were in front of them. I think the Cardinals were 10th. And I think they had the Brewers right around them.
Which, again, makes sense.
And then the Pirates were way down there, but Pirates weren't down there like the Orioles or the Rangers or some of those.
I don't remember who projected them, but like the Orioles were projected 0.0% to make the playoffs.
I believe that was MLB.
Yeah, that was MLB.
How does MLB? I mean, if you're MLB, don't you just have to give them like they have like a 0.5%?
0.1.
Yeah, we got to give them something. You can't just give a fan base of one of your franchises no hope. You know what? We give them no hope.
I mean, you can't even use so you're telling me there's still a chance meme with them if it's 0.0. It's not it's not Jim Carrey, it's Mr. Blutarski.
Yeah, that's sad. But yeah, there's a couple teams that are just going to be abysmally bad this year. And I feel bad because, I think I've mentioned before, my all-time favorite player growing up was Cal Ripken. I don't know why. I can't explain it. Just always was. So the Orioles were like a team I always liked because Cal Ripken spent his entire career with them. And I have no, now that he's long retired, I have, no loyalty to the Orioles, but I have a soft spot for them just because I spent a long time being a fan of Cal Ripken. So, it sucks seeing them just be brutally bad. And that team just can't ever figure it out.
It is too bad. I liked watching them get good very briefly. What was it, like 2013, 2014, around there? And I was hoping they'd be good for a little while, but no, that fell off pretty quickly. And they're still paying Chris Davis a ton of money to be like the worst player in baseball now.
Yeah, and in that, they're in a shit division for trying. It's always competitive, and they're just always jokishly bad, and it sucks. If if I lived closer, it's a great stadium.
Oh, it looks so beautiful.
Yeah.
I've always wanted to go to Camden Yards.
Yeah, I've been there once, and it's a nice stadium, and it's funny. It's one of those stadiums that you look at it, and it's starting to get older. I mean, as far as new stadiums,
It kind of paved the way for modern stadiums.
yeah, it really was, and it's held up.
Yes, it has beautifully. I mean, it's got that perfect mix of like old and new. It's very the stands are very the structure of the stands are very modern built, but the elements of Camden Yards are very old school. You have a brick backstop. You have that big 100-plus-year-old warehouse that's beyond right field. You have that big scoreboard wall in right field. You got a really nice mix of old and new elements to it. And boy, would I just love to see it. And the other sad thing is too, I don't know if you pay attention at all, but in normal times when, fans are allowed in the stands, whenever the Red Sox or Yankees play there, when they play the Orioles, the place is sold out with like 90% Red Sox or Yankees fans.
Oh, absolutely. Because it's one of those stadiums where, flying into Baltimore, you can take from New York, you could take a train.
Yeah.
It's a short flight from Boston. It's drivable from New York. And then those two cities have big fan bases that are, it's kind of like the Cubs where they move around. And, they're all on the East Coast. So it makes sense. It's kind of like when Blackhawks fans travel down to Nashville. It's very similar. So, it's not surprising. And the organization just looks at it as like, well, you know what? We can't do anything about it. Might as well financially benefit from it.
They probably like it. They probably love all those fans going. They probably look forward to Yankees and Boston Red Sox games the most because that's when they know they're going to get the most ticket revenue.
I just looked. Camden Yards is 29 years old.
Yeah, it's older than me.
It's crazy. Like, it's still, you look at it as like one of the newer parks because it has held up.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we're talking about the Orioles, I decided to pull up the video where in 2007 the Rangers scored 30 runs against them. Do you remember that?
Oh yeah, I remember.
Oof. Ugh. And you know what's also a shame? Like, everything about the Orioles, the way they look, is great. I love their uniforms and color scheme.
Absolutely. Is Guaranteed Rate Field opened the year before Camden Yards.
Yep. So it kind of missed out on the modern look, even though they have modernized Guaranteed Rate Field over the years. When they first built Guaranteed Rate Field, when it was Comiskey Park 2, it was still kind of, a little more on the cookie cutter side. And that kind of died out in the 80s. And then they built Camden Yards, and then that kind of paved the way to modern ballparks. And then since then, they've modernized Guaranteed Rate pretty nicely, I think.
I haven't been there in a few years, and they have done work. It just, it sucks that they didn't do that work initially and be on the cutting edge of things when they built it.
Yeah.
Not trying to cause rivalry or compare, but with the Cubs, they're doing a lot of nice things with the confines of building within an ancient stadium.
Okay, it's funny you bring that up because I wanted to bring that up at some point because I saw a post today. It's called Lost Ballparks. They're on Facebook, and somebody posted a picture of Wrigley Field in 2005. So before like the first bleacher renovation, when it was still like the old 1930s bleachers and everything, and they were trying to say a lot of people were trying to negatively look at the recent renovations of Wrigley Field, saying it's killed it. It's gotten rid of the aesthetic. It's, it's not Wrigley Field anymore. And, I like the modernization of it because, one, they've actually taken the outside look and remodeled it to make it look like it did in the 1930s. And two, I think there was much needed modernization of things inside the ballpark. I think the biggest complaint that we've seen from people is the video boards. Personally, I like them. That's just me, though.
I don't care about the video board. I could take it or leave it, but it got to a point where it just wasn't safe to be in there. So the modernization had to happen. You had to fix things up. And I think they've done a very good job of adding cool new elements like the little park there. And
Gallagher Way is great.
Yeah, it's awesome. I mean, I don't know if you've ever been to Petco Park in San Diego. They have a similar thing, and it is so much fun. If you go to a game with kids, it's nice to be able to just take them out there and enjoy the baseball experience, not just sitting in a seat, because kids, break it to people is kids don't like to sit at a sporting event in their seat for the entirety of the game.
No, it's pretty rare some kid does that. I mean, honestly, no, you're totally right. They made it a lot more family friendly, I believe. And I mean, I love what they did with the bleachers because I've sat in the bleachers a few times since they renovated it. That's nice. The Cubs shop is very nice, and some of the restaurants they built. I don't really care about the clubs, all those clubs they added, because that really just caters to the corporate. So I don't really care about that. But the ballpark needed modernization. I mean, I'm pretty sure that a lot of that stuff wasn't even up to modern code by that point. I mean, you remember in the mid-2000s, when that picture was taken on Lost Ballparks, that was when they had nets holding up the upper deck so concrete wouldn't fall on people.
And that's terrifying. I remember being there for the Winter Classic, and you just kept watching above you, like, man, is something gonna fall on me?
It could be ice, it could be concrete, it could be a mixture.
It could be
of
a
both.
drunk fan. It could be Rocky Wirtz.
Rocky Wirtz just tumbles from the upper deck and falls on you.
But it's the people that are bitching and complaining about it are the same people that bitched and complained that they got rid of the McDonald's.
Oh my God. I remember that dumpy little Wrigley Field McDonald's across the street. Now they have a much nicer McDonald's in the hotel that is not covered in puke and slime and other unknown liquids.
What's hilarious is I hadn't thought about that McDonald's in years, and I thought about it the other days. I don't know if you saw the viral video that went out of a McDonald's in San Francisco where a homeless man carrying a dead raccoon walked into the McDonald's and just put it on the table and just sat there with a dead raccoon on the table. And all I could think of was, I probably have seen this at that McDonald's right by Wrigley at some point. And I don't know why it made me think of that, but talking about it now, I was like, that was a sketch ass McDonald's. And I don't know why.
So was the Taco Bell.
Yeah, the Taco Bell was worse. I don't know
Yeah,
why, people are nostalgic about a McDonald's. Like, there's not 4 million of them. I mean, it's one thing if you're like, I'm nostalgic about when they used to have the Happy Meals in a bucket with the ghost faces on it that you could use for trick-or-treating. Okay. Or when they had the cool playlands, or you could have a birthday party there. Like, okay, I get those things. Those are general things, but yeah, I miss there being a McDonald's in that spot. I'm like, okay, because there's not 8 million McDonald's within a walking distance.
And again, there still is. It's in the hotel. There's still a McDonald's across the street. So if you really want a Big Mac after a Cubs game, you could just go there.
People are wild, man. People are wild. But I just don't see it. Going to Wrigley Field now, it feels nicer. You have a lot of the you have a lot of the aesthetic of being an old ballpark, but with modern amenities, and they're still improving it. So you're seeing, Boston did a good job of that at Fenway.
Yes, they did.
It's a good thing. It's a good thing. You don't lose the history, but you gain the coolness of a new ballpark.
You could look at the right way and the wrong way. I think the Cubs renovated the right way, though I think they overspent a little bit on the surrounding area. But in terms of renovating the ballpark itself, it's very nice compared to Soldier Field, which was renovated the wrong way. And there's another Ted Phillips no-no right there. And I don't really even consider that a renovation, in my opinion. They basically rebuilt the place.
They did. What the Bears did was an atrocity. They were not allowed to mess with the exterior. It had to keep that same exterior. So they basically put a new stadium in a bowl and set it down in top of there. And I mean, you're probably too young to remember, but they rerouted Lakeshore Drive. It used to go on the other side of Soldier Field.
Mm-hmm.
So they rerouted a road for this stupid monstrosity of a stadium, and it's annoying. You're just like, why? You have this historic franchise. You could have done something so cool with this iconic old stadium and really modernize things, and you botched it.
Honestly, personally, I would have built a whole new stadium somewhere else in the city or even in the suburbs. I just don't think that's a great location anymore. And what's the point of keeping nostalgia when there's no nostalgia left?
I think that would have been a prime one to move to like a Rosemont.
Yes.
Because Rosemont, you have multiple expressways running right through there. You could have built a giant parking structure. They have public transportation to take you there. You could have built a dome.
Mm-hmm.
And you would have had just an absolute island there. They probably would have given you the land.
Think of all the NCAA tournaments and Super Bowls you could host in a type of building like that.
Right. And then you could have, you walked away and the city used that spot for Soldier Field for something else.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you don't want to tear it down, you could use it for other things. And don't get me wrong, I've never been to the old Soldier Field. I was too young, but I've read a lot about it. My parents have told me about it. Other friends have told me about it. The old Soldier Field was very outdated, from what I understand.
Yep.
Incredibly outdated. But the sad thing is, you go to Soldier Field now, it still feels outdated. I mean, I like the seats themselves, but everything else. You go to the concourse, it's like cement and cinder block. Like there's nothing there. And I know this is like a sin for me to say as a Bears fan, but I've been to Lambeau Field, and Lambeau Field is the concourse, everything inside is so nice. It's so nice there. I don't care for the benches, but everything else about Lambeau Field, that's what I'd want as a concourse. And if you want just a stadium in general, that Minnesota stadium looks just breathtaking, out of this world good.
If I was Virginia McCaskey, and where you were handed this lottery ticket of owning inheriting a multi-billion-dollar franchise, I would have just been like, listen, I'm filthy rich already, and just pumped all that money back into building this just absolutely awesome stadium. That's the state-of-the-art thing. The NFL will basically lend you the money. They will lend you the money. So, you borrow from the NFL, you build this amazing stadium, you're going to pay it off in a couple of years because of the equity of the team and the revenue. Just pour it into it and have the state-of-the-art stadium But it's just how it works,
Heck, if we had a Ford Field type, that would be great. If we had something a lot like Ford Field or even like Lucas Oil Stadium, because, let's say they didn't renovate Soldier Field and they built something new in the early 2000s. It wouldn't probably be as fancy and modern as, say, the new Falcons Stadium or US Bank Stadium in Minnesota. But boy, if you could have had something like Lucas Oil or Ford Field, that would be great. And I think the other thing we really got to talk about, too, when it comes to Soldier Field is you have one of the smallest capacities in the NFL for one of the biggest fan bases. Like,
Yep.
Come on.
Yep. It has to be bigger. And you can't. You can't host.
And getting there,
Even if you were to post or put a dome on it, it's not big enough for them to host a Super Bowl.
Right. They're short by a few thousand seats, I believe. And it's not like you go to Soldier Field and every view is great, because I'm thinking the East and West. The East and West seats, facing East or the East side isn't as bad, but the West side, it's like climbing a mountain. Like up there, you go up there, you feel like you're gonna fall off a cliff up there.
It was the biggest complaint of when New Comiskey was built. Is you were like,
yes,
like, oh my god, like I am on a steep incline here, and they've since adjusted it. They've reworked it. But yeah, Soldier Field it's a lot like that. You're like, when you get the cheap seats, it's not like that. Gary and I went to a game two years ago, where we were like third row, and not far from the 50. Like we were right on. They were playing the Jets, and they were like right behind the Jets players. Like we were close enough to just almost reach out and touch them. And I was like, man, it's extraordinarily expensive to sit down here, but man, is it cool. It was so cool to be able to sit down there as opposed to being up so high where you just, you feel like you're like climbing a mountain. Your hands get sweaty from how high up you are.
Sean gets dizzy and starts Bills fan puking all over people.
And it just goes rolling down, and people get caught in it. It becomes like a landslide.
What is going on? Oh, there's some guy just puking all the way from the top of the nosebleed section.
But looping this back to the Cubs. Two of the things I want to talk about is, for the first time in a long time, the Cubs lost an arbitration hearing.
Mm-hmm. Ian Happ is walking away with a big smile on his face.
Yeah, he what did he get? $800,000 more than the Cubs were willing to offer.
Hey, good for him.
I mean, so the Cubs put him at $3.25 million, and he ended up winning his arbitration hearing at $4.1, which I still think is more than fair for Ian Happ.
No, I agree.
So yeah, it's funny that the Cubs have avoided the arbitration, or not lost an arbitration hearing. Was it like 14 years or something?
It's been a while. I know it's been a while.
Yeah, so that's...
Was it Ryan Terrio? Who was it?
I don't remember. I'd have to go back and look. But it's been a long time.
Yeah, I'd have to look too.
The other one was the Cubs have a under the radar signing of Jake Marisnick.
Their outfield depth is suddenly looking a lot better because you add Jake Marisnick, and they just brought back Cameron Maybin on a minor league deal, who did some nice things in brief time last year. The guy's a good fielder, a very professional, I think a welcome presence in that locker room. So the outfield for the Cubs is looking pretty good, because if you look at their starting three in Peterson, Happ, and Hayward, you got three at least good defenders and two guys that could really mash the ball, and a guy who has been much better at hitting the ball in Jason Hayward in the past few years. And then if you got Jake Marisnick and Cameron Maybin as two of your depth guys, all of a sudden that outfield is not looking too shabby.
Yeah, what's nice about it is Hayward can play right, or he can play center. Hap can play any of the three. Jock Peterson can play left or center. I mean, you probably don't want to live with him in center, but he has played center in the past.
He could play anywhere. Yeah.
Jake Marisnick can play all three spots. And so you have the ability to not paint yourself in a corner, being like, well, with not to beat a dead horse, but Schwarber was very limited where you could play him. He had one spot out there that you could play, and so you have the ability to kind of maneuver yourself with the depth that you have with your defensive abilities. You don't have to necessarily have a late game defensive replacement because you've got good defenders out there. You can go on batting matchups. And a guy like Jake Marisnick, he fits in there versus lefties. So you could swap him with Peterson or Jason Hayward. And otherwise he's a nice bench off or a bat off the bench. He's a good enough base runner where he can be a pinch runner, and you don't feel, past pinch runners that the Cubs have used regularly were guys that were, real shitty batters, and, you didn't want to keep them in for long because once they got to the plate, they weren't doing anything. At least Marisnick can do a few things, so you could
He's
you
got
could use
some
him as a
decent
pinch
pop for a bench guy.
Mm-hmm. And he's a good defensive replacement. And he comes from a winning organization with the Astros. He spent most of his career there. So I think that's a real under the radar signing. I'm not like, oh my God, this guy is the end all be all, but I think as far as building depth on a team, which is something the Cubs have really lacked, I think this was a swing and a hit.
Yeah, I think if you look at the depth now and where the depth was even just a few weeks ago, it's pretty noticeable. Because within the last few weeks, you brought in Jake Marisnick and Cameron Maybin. Just think about it. We haven't had Jock Peterson that long. So before you had Jock Peterson, it was looking like your starting three was going to be Phil Ervin, Ian Happ, and Jason Hayward.
And Phil Ervin isn't with the team anymore.
No, he was designated for assignment. So, all of a sudden it's looking good. And you also have some options that are on non-roster invitee or on the 40-man roster. They brought in Nick Martini, who is versatile. Be on the lookout for him. So there are some options there that they could go to. And I'm looking forward to watching the outfielders play this spring training.
Yeah. I don't know what to expect with the Cubs this year, but to be honest, for a team that had to look to cut payroll, I think they're doing a decent job of putting together a team. I'm much higher, more optimistic than I was a few weeks ago.
Yeah, and I still don't think they're going to be anything overly special, but I think they will be in the mix. And I do think they can still win the division, that division. Not saying that they're slated to be, but I still think it's very possible they could. I mean, look, their starting lineup still looks pretty good. And I do anticipate a lot of these guys bouncing back, as we have discussed before. Anthony Rizzo, Chris Bryant, Javier Baez, Wilson Contreras. Does Chris Bryant play with a little bit of a chip on his shoulder? Does Javier Baez decide, you know what, last year my approach wasn't working, so I'm going to kind of get back to the basics? Am I going to be able to use video again like we did in the past to kind of help things out? Sure. I think there is much reason to believe that these guys will bounce back. But I also think that you're going to run into some patches where the weaknesses are really going to show when you don't have an elite rotation at this point, when your bullpen is very, very questionable. And I think the bullpen has just as good of a chance to be good and bad, but I think there's enough strengths on the team that will at the very least keep them afloat.
Yeah. Yep. So, I think Jed has built a team that while they're not going to compete for a World Series, they're going to be at least competitive and fun to watch.
Yeah, or at least not awful to watch.
True.
But hey, I don't know if you saw it. They announced that they're going to be having a rotation of people announcing TV games for spring training. And we're going to see some Pat Hughes on TV. And I like that very much.
I'm good with that. That's what I like, the news I like to hear.
Mm-hmm. And then we'll have Boog Shambi in the regular season. And, Len Casper will always be one of my favorites. But I am very excited to see Boog Shambi be our announcer. And look, Chris Myers is going to do some of the preseason, and that's okay. That's fine. I just don't think that Chris Myers is a guy I'd want to be the full-time announcer for 160 games or whatever many games are going to be on marquee. But I think they really hit a home run with Boog Shambi, so I'm very excited for that.
I wasn't excited at first, but I'm cautiously optimistic about seeing what the Boogster can do.
I think that if you're going to pick a replacement, he's a good guy to go to because he has both the classic announcer voice and a good personality. And I think that's kind of what you want in an announcer these days. You don't want someone who's overly a goof, but you also want a guy who at least has some personality. And I think Len Casper had great personality. That's one of the reasons I liked him so much. But, Boog Shambi is different, but I think an ideal replacement.
I mean, this is coming from somebody that absolutely loved Ron Santo. And Ron, if you're looking at it from an academic perspective, was fucking terrible.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
But as a diehard, I mean, he was just like one of your drunk buddies just yelling at the TV. And I still remember in a game where this is after he had already had his legs amputated, and he yelled that he was going to jump out of the booth if the Cubs screwed something up. And
I have that a disc where he says that. Hilarious.
And my friend texts me and goes, "Did Ron Santo just say he was going to jump?" I was like, I heard that.
And the thing was, he was dedicated until the very end. I mean, he was still doing games up until he died. He died in December 2010, and he did it all through the 2010 season. He didn't make all the trips, but I remember he was still doing games when they were in Arizona. I think probably because he lives there, but still he was very dedicated to what he did. And I'll never forget times when like Marmol would blow a save and he'd be going, "Go, jeez, God, God," in the background while Pat Hughes was trying to keep composure and seriousness.
It's funny. I wish you could like isolate his audio and not have the game noise, not have anybody else's, just his audio. And it would probably be at points like, not even words,
it just grunts.
It's amazing. Like how does like a major team hire him and him be so beloved? It just that's kind of the guy. Like, it's that. I think part of that's what I love about the non-NFL sports is your team has your own like guy. Like that's your guy, and that's the one who he bleeds there with you. He's on the front lines with you, being a fandom. He's like that's like your spokesfan. It's not like with the NFL where they're like, "Oh, you get Joe Buck," and you're just like, "Oh my God, everybody hates Joe Buck." Like honestly, when you watch the NFL, especially as a Bears fan, when was the last time you got an announcing pair where you're like, "Oh man, I'm excited to hear what they have to say"? Never?
Nah, not very often. I love on the radio. I like listening to the highlights of Jeff Joniak. I love Jeff Joniak, but I don't listen to the game on the radio when it's happening. I want to watch the game on TV.
And it's like you can't, you get it out of sync. Even if you try, try
Exactly.
watching it, it's out of sync. I mean, that's the beauty of hot mic is you can have like real fans, but like at least with basketball, baseball, hockey, you have your home announcing team, and the NFL doesn't have that, and that's a bummer. And I always like it's with most things. I like when you have a unique flavor for each city. So, in sports, when you have like your specific announcer or a specific tradition that the fans do, I just like that kind of thing. I'm a big, outside of sports, I'm a big horror movie buff, and I loved that back when I was a kid. You had like when you'd watch the B movies on like Saturday night or Friday night, there would be, every city had their own different guy that presented the movie. So here in Chicago, we had Sven Gulli.
Sven Gulli.
And like Los Angeles, you had Elvira, and you had like different people, and each city had like the same kind of person, but there was enough, tweak on it in every city that just really made, their own version of it. It was like you could hang your hat on it. Like, that's my local person, especially like, when I moved back from Philadelphia back to the Chicagoland area, I moved to Berwyn, and like, it's just, I'm like, Sven Gulli's always yelling about Berwyn. It was like, that's neat. You have that little tie. So, I love that with baseball, because that's just one of the old traditions. When you go to Cooperstown, the announcers, like, there's, these famous announcers that, you've got your Jack Brickhouses, you've got, all these guys that are just like, they were part of that organization. They were heart, they were like
Vin Scully. Look how long he did his thing.
Yeah, Vin Scully. Like, I don't have any tie to the Dodgers, but you just, you appreciate if you turn on a Dodgers game and you could listen to him talk, and you're just like, I get that flavor of what it's like to be a Dodgers fan.
If you appreciate American sports, you can appreciate what Vin Scully can do behind a mic. He did it for so long. I mean, he started in the 50s and he announced up to 2016. That's amazing.
And it's listening to how he could tell a story and then cut back to the game and then cut back to the story so seamlessly. There's one that I've heard them play a lot on the radio, where he was talking about Madison Bumgarner and some sort of snake, and he's like, I picked up this rattlesnake, and that's a strike on the outside, and Madison Bumgarner picks up the snake, and he just seamlessly is talking about the story of Madison Bumgarner with a snake and calling the game, and you're like, what the hell is this? How do you do that? It's like a wizard.
There was a time when I had a toaster, and then all of a sudden, here's Juan Uribe.
Yeah, so it'll be an interesting year for the Cubs, and it'll be fun to hear new voices and see how those go.
You know what I am kind of sad to think about, though? Pat Hughes, like my all-time favorite baseball announcer, I have that feeling that we're going to hear about him retiring within the next few years. It's a sad thing to think about, but I think it's coming.
Maybe. I mean...
Because if you notice, the last few years, he's cut down more and more on games.
Yeah. And, I'm not a huge fan of how they've filled in the gaps.
You know who was really good? They had Mark Grody. He was really good on the score, and then they took him away. That angered me. He was one of the gap fillers I liked.
It's funny. So he does Bears now, right?
Yeah.
I liked him on the so they flip flop Zach Zaidman and Mark Grody, and I don't like it. I like it the other way.
They were better before.
Yeah, like Zach Zaidman, like Mark Grody. When he talks about Bears, like it's almost like he doesn't know what he's talking about, and and you're like, okay, but you didn't feel that way when you talked to Cubs.
He was great with baseball.
And Zach Zaidman sounds uncomfortable talking baseball, but he was much more comfortable with football. I don't know if that was their choice to kind of flip-flop.
I don't think it was.
Or if it was management, but I don't like it. And, I like a lot of the changes that they've done to score. Like, I like Layla Rahimi on there.
Yeah, she's solid listen.
And I like the new afternoon show.
I'm glad they brought Speaks back permanently. That the fact that he was like let go, I thought that was a crime.
Absolutely. And the one thing that I would like to see is Jared Goff back. Not Jared Goff. Jason Goff. Jason Goff back. I liked him.
He's got a good gig though now with the Bulls.
So he would be like the one guy, but I think they've sort of figured things out. But I didn't like that move with flopping Grody and Zaidman.
I did not either. They were better in their own respective sport.
And it's been long enough where you feel like they should be more comfortable in their roles, and I don't feel it.
No, I agree. Sometimes you're just flat out more comfortable in a certain role, and it's not going to change.
Yeah. I don't really want to talk Bulls, but I want to talk a little bit about Blackhawks.
Yeah.
We saw a good run with the Blackhawks. They had won 3 in a row, 6 of 7. You saw a good performance against Detroit. And then that Carolina game just kind of, it was a big reminder that regardless of what a nice run you've been on, you're not one of the top teams.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I mean, they got pretty manhandled in that game, and it was a tie game until like midway through the third, but they kind of took over, and they were getting outplayed anyway. It was just kind of a matter of time before Carolina would score, take the lead, and kind of put the game away. You're definitely right. I think there's going to be a bit of a rough patch coming. I think there is going to be a bit of evening out, I guess, if you want to call it that, where you kind of see some of the good fortune, the puck bounces and everything kind of turn because, it's been on their side. And I can't take away any credit for how they played. They've played very well. They've surprised people. They've played hard. They've been in every game. They seem very motivated, but when you're in a winning streak or a streak where you're playing well, you do tend to have a few bounces go your way, and that's not going to last. It's going to turn a little bit, and when you have a team as unexperienced as the Blackhawks, because there's a lot of young guys on it, they're going to run into some rough patches. And you play in a division where you have some good teams. Carolina's really good. Tampa Bay is really good. The Florida Panthers are good. The Columbus Blue Jackets are pretty good. So expect a rough patch coming, but as long as they keep playing hard and are in these games, it's hard to complain too much because half your roster is AHL guys, basically.
Yeah, and you watch the Carolina game, and there was you look and going into the third period, it was anybody's game, even though Carolina was outplaying them. The Blackhawks have been scrappy enough and played good enough defense and goalie to keep these games tight. And then you saw, it was the mistakes for the Blackhawks added up, and the fact that the Blackhawks had really no answer for that Sebastian Aho, McGinn, Teuvo Teravainen line.
Yeah, I was kind of cringy watching that, remembering who you once had Teravainen, but that's another story for another day.
But you had the turnoff by Zadorov that led to a goal. You had Janmark fall down that led to a goal. It was just mistakes that Carolina didn't make because they're a better team, and you just couldn't dig yourself out of those.
Yeah.
You saw the Blackhawks struggle in the puck possession with the 5-on-5. The power play came back down to earth.
Yeah, it's struggled the past few games, and it's not even playing bad. It's just not finding the back of the net.
Yeah, and they've had season wide they've had success, but it really came down to earth here against Carolina. You saw the penalty kill not looking great, but it broke the Blackhawks streak of 15 games of not losing by more than one goal, which is a weird stat to keep, but it shows you that the Blackhawks, even though there's a lot of inexperienced players, young players, and guys that, frankly, some of them are not ready to be NHLers, they've just been scrappy enough to keep themselves in games.
Yeah, especially considering their first week of the season, they were losing like 5-1, 5-2 consistently.
And the one beautiful thing of that game, though, is that Patrick Kane goal.
Oh, yeah.
Like
Spinorama backhand.
Like it was, I watched that so many times in a row, and I was just like, how the hell was that a goal? It was like a wizard. But I mean, that has to be, at least in the running so far in this point of the season for goal of the year.
Oh yeah, it's definitely up there. I mean, it was a thing of beauty because it was funny. I was watching that game thinking, Patrick Kane is still doing really well, but where's one of those absolute highlight reel goals that are just insane? And then sure enough, boom, there it was.
Yeah. So, I saw a meme the other day just talking Patrick Kane. It made me laugh, and it said the NHL is allowing taxi squads now, and then the next frame of the meme had the picture of the Notre Dame Fighting Irish logo with the Irish guy with his fists up, and they photoshopped Patrick Kane's face onto it, ready to fight the taxi squad.
Oh.
I was like, all right, I'll give you that one. It was from a Red Wings fan posted it, but I was like, I'll give you that one.
Ooh.
But is there anything else you want to talk about?
No, I think I said my piece. Real good show tonight.
Yeah. So thank you guys so much for listening. Definitely follow our friend Brad from talking about Twitter, talking about the salary cap for the Bears. Follow him on Twitter at PFF_Brad. He's a real good follow. Very knowledgeable guy, and you will learn a lot. So definitely a good follow. That's going to do it for this episode of Bill Swerski Sports Talk Chicago. I want to thank everybody so much for listening. Please hit subscribe however you listen to podcasts, whether it's iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, TuneIn app, Google Play, Spotify, etc. Follow us on social media at Swerski Sports, Facebook.com/Swerski Sports, SwerskiSports.com. Thank you guys again so much for listening. Until next time, bear down.
Cubs win! What a lucky break! The good Lord wants the Cubs to win!
We thank Ditka and God for all they have provided.
Cubs win! Cubs win! Cubs win!
Oh, I don't want her, you can have her, she's a Packer fan. She can't fit in my van.
And she looks like Denver New Yorkers. Smoking crack is not legal on planes. Bears 31 to -7. The Bears! Oh, when the Bears go bearing down.